We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we recently spent some time in a Saneta TV or House of Consciousness live chat debate between a comedian known as Reggie and others, and a comment was made that we, the Ministry of the Real Truth, when we presented the facts about the differences between the Cush descendants, the descendants of Noah, Cush, i.e. the Cushites from the Near East or Levant, with the latter descendants of Abraham that went into Africa, merged with a darker tribe or who were there, intermarried, and then had descendants known as the Cushites with a K. Cush is basically the name of the tribe. Ites is referring to the peoples, the descendants, after that interaction. So there is a difference there. People keep saying the Cushites with the C and the Cushites in Africa with a C as one people, one and the same, when they're actually not. If you look at the biblical Genesis genealogy list, the lineage list of Noah's sons' descendants, you will see there is a vast difference. If Noah and his people stepped out of the ark, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives, and they were European or Caucasian or white, if it was indicated by the scriptures, where's the proof that they were? Where's the proof that they weren't? Okay? It doesn't say they were African. Okay? Or dark, or black. Okay? If you want to have a look, check it out. To see that we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, we're trying to expose to you or reveal to you the actual truth of what the ancient, original, very old Tav Asheret Brita in the Aramaic, from the sacred scribal language spoken by God to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and by the men at the Tower of Babel, spoke. As a sacred scribal language of God that he spoke, or the Old Tongue. Translated into the nearest English equivalent by a native-born Aramaic-speaking translator from Bet Naran, Mesopotamia in Syria. So he should know what he's talking about, and he's been translating those Old Testament Tav Asheret or Aramaic manuscripts, dated at around 800 BCE, because they're hand copied by scribes and monks in Urhaya, in Arabic Urfa or Edessa, now modern Turkey, around 800 BCE. Yeah. And probably held, contained in the original ancient, very old Apostolic Orthodox Church of the East. So, this person said that we were very Eurocentric with that answer. We were like, no, okay. And we got timed out unfairly for it, right? And we couldn't get back in. We kept on getting timed up because we're using this person's name. So obviously they got offended. They might have been a mod or moderator and kept timing us out. So we removed their name eventually and left the rest of the message. And everything was alright after that. Possibly because we, quote, offended them, unquote, by stepping on their ego and exposing them to everybody else in the chat that they were actually wrong, that they couldn't see this difference because they have a motive or an agenda. We want to push everything Pan-African. Okay, nothing else matters. Ours is the truth. Yours isn't. We have these hidden propagandic strategies, agendas, motives for doing it. Okay, so we are definitely not Euro-centered. We look at both sides of a coin, because obviously a coin has 2 sides, doesn't it? Okay, it doesn't have one. Or we look at both sides of the story, okay, told by an ancient, from an ancient civilization, and another one, right? We compare them, and then we look at the experts. This guy is saying that guy is saying that. Know which one is correct, which one isn't, and we expose them. So we're looking at this particular book to verify that we're not just Euro-centric, okay? We're looking at this book, the deluxe edition of the works of George Rawlinson, Egyptologist, M.A., so he's highly qualified in his day. A History of Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. And maybe there's 4 volumes, maps, diagrams and illustrations in all. Preface. The work here offered to the public, conceived and commenced in the year 1876, was designed to supply what seemed a crying need of English literature, an account of ancient Egypt, combining its antiquities with its history, addressed partly to the eye and presenting to the reader within a reasonable compass the chief points of Egyptian life, manners, customs, art, science, literature, religion, together with a tolerably full statement of the general course of historical events whereof Egypt was the scene, from the foundation of the monarchy to the loss of independence. See, people got to understand that there is a lot of Euro-Egyptologists, and people say, oh, because they're Euro, they're fake, they're liars, all that sort of stuff. But at that time, that century, those years, there wasn't many black Egyptologists, right, doing this sort of thing. If someone was at a university, had the qualifications, etc., maybe a professor, and he happened to be black, African black, or US Negro, then the faculty would give him a hard time, and he'd probably get expelled from it, expunged, right, kicked out, in order to stop him from revealing that to African or Negro peoples, right, students. That's what we found through our own personal research. There were some professors that was done to them. But there are a few Pan-African style scholars, theologians, experts, etc. out there. But there weren't as many, or near none, in the times of people like Rawlinson, William A. Breasted, Wallace Budge, and so forth that we found. Existing English histories of ancient Egypt were either slight and scantily illustrated, like those of Canon Trevor and Dr. Birch, or wanting in illustrations altogether, like Mr. Kenrick's, or not confined to the period which seemed to deserve special attention, like the, quote, Egypt, unquote, of Mr. Samuel Sharp. Accordingly, the present writer, Rawlinson, having become aware that no history of Egypt on a large scale was contemplated by Dr. Birch, designed in 1876 the work, now published this particular book in these volumes, regarding it in part as necessary to round off and complete his other principal labours in the historical field, in part as calculated to fill up a gap which it was important to fill up in the historical literature of his country. Since his intention was announced and the sheets of his first volume to some extent printed off, English literature has been enriched by 2 most important publications on the subject of Egypt. Dr. Birch's excellent edition of Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Ancient Egyptians, and the translation of Dr. Bruchke, and it's in German, Geschichte Egyptians. You haven't used German for a long time. Made by the late Mr. Danby Seymour and Mr. Philip Smith. Had these works existed in the year 1876, or had he known that they were forthcoming, the author, Rawlinson, felt that the present volumes would never have seen the light in his day. But as they were tolerably advanced when he first became aware to what rivalry his poor efforts would be subjected, it was scarcely possible for him to draw back and retract his announced intentions. Instead of so doing, he took refuge in the hope that neither of the 2 new works would altogether preoccupy the ground which he had marked out for himself, and in the pleasing persuasion that the general public, when books are published on a subject in which it feels an interest, and are devoured with avidity, has its appetite rather whetted by the process than satisfied. He trusted therefore to find in England and America a sufficient body of readers to justify his present venture and prevent his publishers from suffering any loss through him. That'd probably be profit, money, all that sort of stuff, or time even, all included. In preparing the volumes, the author has endeavoured to utilise the enormous stores of antiquarian and historical material accumulated during the last 80 years or more, and laid up in works of vast size and enormous cost, quite inaccessible to the general public. So only a select people had them. Of these, the most magnificent are the Description de l'Egypte, published by the French savants who accompanied the expedition of the great Napoleon, the Monumenti del Egitto e della Nubia of Ippolito Rossellini, sounds like an Italian, and the Denmarkerlehre, it's probably a German, Professor Lepsius. M. Marriott's monuments, etc., have also furnished him with a considerable number of illustrations. Possessing only a rudimentary knowledge of the Egyptian language and writing, he has made it his aim to consult, this is Rawlinson probably, as far as possible the various translations of the Egyptian documents which have been put forth by advanced students, and to select the rendering which seemed on the internal evidence most satisfactory. He had based his general narrative to a large extent on these translations, so they were translations, and where they failed him, had endeavoured to supply their place by a careful study not only of finished histories of Egypt, like those of Lenormant, Birch and Brooks, but those of elaborate monographs upon special points, in which French and German scholars subject to the keenest scrutiny the entire evidence upon this or that subject or period. Such books as Deruge's, some French here by the look of it, and Chabas's Pasteurs in Egypt, and Malange's Egyptologies, etc., etc., and Lepsius pamphlets, there's a whole list of them, are specimens of the class of works to which allusion is here made, and have been, well, it's been pointed out, right? It's pointing to, and have been the sources of the present narrative much more than any methodized histories. The author, Rawlinson, however, was far from wishing to ignore the obligations under which he lied to former, we didn't lie and tell some false work, it's a different term. He lies to former historians of Egypt, such as Bunsen, or maybe he relates to former historians of Egypt, such as Bunsen, Kenrick, Lenormant, Birch and Brugsch, without whose works his could certainly not have been written. He was only anxious to claim for it a distinct basis in the monographs of the best Egyptologists in the great collection of illustrations noticed, and to call attention to the fact that he had endeavoured in all cases to go behind the statements of the historiographers and to draw his own conclusions from the materials on which those statements were based. So Mr. Regi of Sarneta TV, this is where it's coming from. Okay? He's looking at the translations and these supposed claims by these historiographers to draw his own conclusions from the materials on which those statements were based. In conclusion, he would express his obligations to his engraver and artist, Mr. G. Pearson and Mr. P. Hunderley, in respect of his illustrations, to the late Colonel Howard Weiser in respect of all that he had ventured to say concerning the pyramids, to Mr. James Ferguson in respect of his remarks on the rest of Egyptian architecture, to his old friend and colleague, the late Sir Gardiner Wilkinson. Maybe that was his brother or something. If he's a Wilkinson and he's a Wilkinson, maybe that was his older parent, right, or father, in respect, or even grandfather, in respect of the entire subject of Egyptian customs and manners, to M. Wiedemann in respect of the history of the 26th dynasty, and to R. Stuart Poole, Dr. Eisenlaw, M. de Veria, and other writers on Egyptian subjects in the Dictionary of the Bible, the Review, the Archaeological Review, and the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. He has lived to feel continually more and more how small a part of each history is due to the nominal author, and how large a share belongs to the earlier works in the field. He trusts that in the past he had never failed conspicuously in the duty of acknowledging obligations. But, however that may be, he would at any rate wish, in the present and in future, not to be liable to the charge of such failure. To all those whose works he had used, he would hereby express himself greatly beholden. Very, very grateful, right, to them. He would ask their pardon if he has involuntarily misrepresented them, got some things wrong, right, and made them look silly, and would crave at their hands a lenient judgment on the present volumes. Canterbury, December 31, 1880. And here's your contents page, or pages. Then your list of illustrations. History of Ancient Egypt, Chapter 1. The Land. Geography of Egypt, boundaries, dimensions and character of the country, proportions of cultivable territory, dependence on the Nile, course of the Nile, the tributaries, time and cause of the inundation, chief divisions of the territory, the Nile Valley, the Delta, the Fayoum, the Eastern Desert, the Valley of the Natural Lakes, character of the adjoining countries. That's supposedly a description of what's contained in this chapter. And then here's something in Greek by Herod 2:5. Looks like Greek. The broad stretch of desert which extends from the shores of the Atlantic Ocean across Africa and Western Asia almost to the foot of the Zagros mountain range is pierced in one place only by a thin thread of verdure. A single stream issuing from the equatorial regions has stretched strength to penetrate the frightful desert of interminable scorching sand, and to bring its water safely through 2,000 miles of arid, thirsty plain in order to mingle with them with the blue waves of the Mediterranean. It is this fact which has produced Egypt. The life-giving fluid on its way through the desert spreads verdure and fertility along its course on either bank, and a strip of most productive territory is thus created, suited to attract the attention of such a being as man, and to become the home of a powerful nation. We think he's talking about the Nile there. Egypt proper is the land to which the river gave birth, and from which it took name. That's actually a Greek name, isn't it? Greek, Latin name. Egyptus, etc. Not its original name. Or the ancient's name, right? Or at any rate that land to a certain distance from the Mediterranean. But as the race settled in this home naturally and almost necessarily exercises dominion beyond the narrow bounds of the valley, it is usual, and it is quite right, to include under the name of Egypt a certain quantity of the arid territory on either side of the Nile, and thus to give to the country an expansion considerably beyond that which it would have if we confine the name strictly to the fluvial and alluvial region. The boundaries of Egypt are by general consent: on the north the Mediterranean, on the east the Red Sea, and a line drawn from the head of the Gulf of Suez to the Wadi al-Arish, or Wadi al-Arish, or River of Egypt of the Hebrews. On the south the first cataract, latitude 24 degrees, whatever that is, and a line drawn thence to the Red Sea at the ruins of Berenice. On the west the great Libyan desert. The tract included within these limits is in the main an irregular parallelogram lying obliquely from north-northwest to south-southeast, and extending about 520 miles in this direction, with a width of about 160 miles. From the parallelogram thus formed lie out two considerable projections, both triangular, etc., etc. Within these limits the character of the territory presents some most extreme and violent contrasts. And now a strip of he keeps describing Egypt, okay, and all that relates to it. There's a lot of detail there of what it was like, or what he's seen in his day. It was found by the scientific men who accompanied the great French expedition at the close of the last century that the land actually under cultivation amounted to no more than 1,907,757 hectares, or 4,714,543 acres. But they saw and noted that besides this cultivated territory there were considerable tracts quite fit for crops which remained untilled. These they estimated to amount, and they give the measurements, etc., so that the total cultivable land at the time of the observations was 5,865,833 acres. Another estimate, somewhat less exact, reduced the amount to 5,189,625 acres. The difference between the cultivable area and actual And it goes on and on about that. Yeah, it's been forever on those stats. If we regard the entire era of ancient Egypt as amounting to from 95,000 to 1,000 square miles and the cultivable surface as only about 7 million of acres, we must come to the conclusion that considerably more than 7/8 of the soil, perhaps not much short of 8/9, was infertile and almost worthless. In fact, Egypt depends for her fertility almost wholly upon the Nile. The Arabian desert, which fences her in upon the right, is little less unproductive than the frightful Sahara upon the left. And had the Nile not existed, or had it taken a different course, the depressed tract through which it runs from Syene to the Mediterranean world would have been no less barren and arid than the wadis of Arabia, Petraea, or even than the Sahara itself. The land, if not the gift of the river, in the sense which Herodotus, that's the Greek historian, he wrote down all that happened at the supposed 300, but he actually said 900, something like that, because was it the Athenians left, but they still had this other group there that stood by them, so there's 900. Yeah, it's supposed to be the Greek father of history. Okay, so the land, if not the gift of the river in the sense of which Herodotus intended, is at any rate as a country created by the river and sustained by it, and hence a necessity felt by all who have ever made Egypt the subject of their pens, or of placing the Nile in the forefront of their works and describing as fully as they could its course and its phenomena. The duty thus incumbent on every historian of ancient or modern Egypt is, at the present day and onwards, happily beset with fewer difficulties than at any former time. The long untrodden interior of Africa has been penetrated by British enterprise, and hitherto inscrutable Sphinx of Egypt has been forced to reveal her secrets. Speke and Grant, Baker, Livingstone and Gordon, remember Livingstone, he and another guy trekked across Africa. Gordon and Cameron have explored till there is little left to learn. The water system of the African interior, and the modern historian, thanks to their noble labours, can track the mighty stream of the Nile from its source to its embouchure. What's that, embouchure? Can tell the mystery of its origin, describe its course, explain its changes, and account for them, declare the causes of that fertility which it spreads around, and of that unfailing abundance whereof it boasts, paint the regions through which it flows, give, at least approximately, Jesus, go have a pause, the limits of its basin, and enumerate, in some cases describe, its tributaries. The profound ignorance of 17 centuries was succeeded about 10 years since, prior to this book probably being written, or thereafter, by a time of half knowledge, of bold hypothesis, of ingenious, unproved and conflicting theories. This twilight time of speculation has gone by. The areas occupied by the basins of the Nile, the Congo and the Zambezi are tolerably nearly ascertained. The great reservoirs from which the Nile flows are known, and if any problems still remain unsolved, they are of an insignificant character and may be properly considered as mere details, interesting no doubt, but of comparatively slight importance. And it goes on more about the Nile. And then the Blue Nile. I think it was rising in the hills of Abyssinia. Yeah. The Blue Nile rises in the highlands of Abyssinian latitude, and there's a latitude to it. And there's the White Nile, or True Nile. A lot of details on that. The latitude, altitudes, all this sort of stuff. It talks about the White Nile. The White Nile, in his day, was found to be not only the main but the only true river, fed by the great equatorial lakes and supported by rainfall which continues for more than 9 months of the year from February to November. This mighty and unfailing stream carries down to the Mediterranean, a vast and only slightly varying body of water, the amount of which may be estimated by considering the volume poured out into the sea, even when the Nile is lowest. Then he gives the stats and goes into more detail about the latitude and all that sort of stuff. It's basically what this chapter seems to be about. Detailed description with the latitudes of the geographical location and so forth. It's giving you this description, so you can imagine what it was like, get a feel for it probably. Okay, and these are all the animals that were probably there at the time. This looks like tree tomatoes, something like that. Probably the originator of it. Looks very much like it when you cut one open, right? And it bleeds and all that sort of stuff. But it's just the juices, right? Looks very much like that. Yeah, the Great Monitor, see page 37. Looks like some sort of reptile. Or kind of looks like the forefather of a lizard. Not a lizard, a eel, right? Got the eel tail here. We know because we eat them. Yeah, without legs. Yeah, pre-runner to the eel. Okay, fruit of the Nymphada Nelumbo, Egyptian ass. Okay, it means this mule, a crossbreed between a donkey and a horse or something like that. Here's these dogs, different kinds of dogs. Hyena caught in a trap. Yeah, because hyenas are basically scavengers, aren't they? They're dog-like and wolf-like sort of thing, or mixture of whatever. And they're scabbers, aren't they? Scavengers. And they laugh. They're called laughing hyenas. It's like they're laughing at you, right? Figure 11, head of Egyptians. It's of a man. And that does not look black. Okay, like an African person. It looks more like a, probably Eastern, maybe, not too sure, maybe an Indian. If it was a proper picture, we'd be able to prove that that's what it is. It doesn't look like an African woman. Okay, the glossy Isis, the ibis religioso from the description, some sort of bird. Is that iris or Isis? Looks like iris. Looks like our bird that we got here, the pukeka. Yeah, Maori chicken. Yeah, and some sort of fish. Yeah. And it states here, the countries whereby ancient Egypt was bordered were three only: Ethiopia, Libya and Syria, including Palestine. Ethiopia, which lay towards the south, was a tract considerably larger than Egypt, comprising as it did not only Nubia, which flowed the Atbara and Blue Nile rivers. It was also in part a region of great fertility, capable of supporting a numerous population, which inhabiting a mountain territory would naturally be brave and hardy. Egypt could not but have something to fear from this quarter, but a certain degree of security was afforded by the fact that between her frontier and the fertile portion of Ethiopia lay a desert tract, extending for above 6 degrees or more than 400 miles between the mouth of the Atbara and so on. So they fortified. It's like a massive Grand Canyon, like a pathway, right? Let's say a wide ass tunnel passage, and they built their forts and towers overlooking those areas in certain places because they were constantly invaded by Hittites, etc., coming to try and invade and take over Egypt and all that they have, right? Because it was very fertile, very plentiful, right? So they forewarned them and they sent their armies out to drive them back before they got any further. So yeah, you had to go through this long passage. Like it's like a, when you go in a motorway, you go into the tunnel. It's like that, but it's up that top, right? Either side, like it's desert, right? So yeah, that kept them pretty safe. Okay. The dangers of the desert might indeed be avoided by following this course of the Nile, but the distance was under such circumstances very considerable, increased the march from Meroe to Sain being augmented from one of 450 to one of 850 miles. Or, as we said, it was like could be like a passage, right? There's deserts on either desert hills, mountains, whatever on either side, or it could have just been a flat plain, for miles and miles and miles. Could have been like that. It's an alternative. Hence, the ordinary route followed was that across the Nubian desert, a distance of not less than 10 days march for an army, and thus practically it may be said that a barrier difficult to surmount protected Egypt on the south and rendered her, unless upon rare occasions, secure from attack on that side. So there you go. The vast tract known to the ancients vaguely as Libya and inhabited by Libyans extended from the delta and the Nile Valley between valley westward across the entire continent, comprehending all North Africa west of Egypt, excepting the small Greek settlements of Cyrene and Barca, and the Phoenician ones of Carthage, Utica and Hippo. And apparently there was white Libyans in those days. We've come across that in the histories. The geographical area was enormous, but the inhospitable nature of the region, which is for the most part an arid, it's very, very hot, and unproductive desert, very, very dry. Nothing grows there much. Through dotted with palm-bearing oases, because that's probably the plural of an oasis, which is singular, rendering it in the main unfit for the habitation of man, and kept the scattered tribes that wandered over its surface from multiplying. There's just nothing there, you die off. The portion of North Africa which borders on Egypt is particularly sterile and unattractive. A scant and sparse population can alone contrive and find subsistence amid its parched and barren waste. And this population, engaged in a perpetual struggle for existence, is naturally broken up into tribes which regard each other with animosity. They're like suspicious of each other. It's like, I don't trust these fellows, and live in a state of constant war, rapine, and mutual injury. So this basically is saying they weren't civil. They weren't civilized. They weren't a civilization, because they're at each other, fighting each other. Combination is almost impossible under such circumstances, and thus the great and powerful monarchy of Egypt could have little to fear from the tribes upon its western frontier, which were individually weak and were unapt to form leagues or alliances. Once alone in the history of Egypt does any great attack come from this quarter, some peculiar circumstances having favoured a temporary union between races ordinarily very much disinclined to act together. On the east, Egypt was protected along the greater portion of her frontier by a water barrier, a broad and impassable moat, the Red Sea, and its western prolongation, the Gulf of Suez, and that's what they worked on over the centuries, and the others worked on it up until modern day. And that's how the Indians, they had their trade route from India to Egypt, and that's why they possibly brought leprosy there, or took it back to India, according to the histories. And there's more of them, or information about that. Go a bit further down. Egypt enjoyed some extent the protection of a desert. Egypt is separated from Syria by the sandy tract known to the Arabs as El Tej. Might be T, no. El Tej, we just go with that. The wilderness of their wanderings. The width of the desert is, however not great. Armies have at all times traversed it without much difficulty, and with the support of a fleet it is easy to conduct a force along the coast route from Gaza to Pelusium. And maybe that's a way that Alexander the Greek invaded and conquered Egypt. Accordingly, we shall find that it was especially in this quarter on her northeastern border that Egypt came into contact with other countries, made her own chief military expeditions, and lay open to attack from formidable enemies. There's strong numbers, etc., right, like Alexander the Great and his army. The strip of fertile land alternate mountain and rich plain, which intervenes between the eastern Mediterranean and the Palmyrene or Syrian desert, has at all times been a nursery of powerful and warlike nations. Emim, Rephaim, Philistines, Canaanites, Israelites, Hittites, Jews, Saracens, Drusus. Here in this desirable region which she could not help coveting, Egypt was brought into collision with foemen worthy of her steel. Here was the scene of her early military exploits, and hence came the assault of her first really dangerous enemy. Moreover, it was through this country alone, along this fertile but somewhat narrow strip, that she could pass to broader and richer regions, to Mesopotamia, Assyria, Asia Minor, seats of a civilization almost as ancient as her own. Well, they probably actually were more ancient, but they weren't a civilization like her. Like, they weren't civil. They were fighting with each other. Then Egypt decides, well, we unite north and south, upper, lower, and here's some rules we follow. We're unified. No more fighting each other amongst ourselves, all that sort of stuff, warring against each other. Okay, and then they became that civilization, amazing civilization. In that sense, they were civil with each other. Okay, so she was the seat of civilization, almost. These other ones, a seat of civilization almost as ancient as her own. Wealthy, populous, well-cultivated tracts next to the Nile Valley, the fairest portions of the Earth's surface. Thus, her chief efforts were always made on this side, and her history connects with her not so much with Africa as with Asia. For 20 centuries, the struggle for the first place among the nations of the earth was carried on in these regions. Egypt's rivals and enemies were Syria, Assyria, Babylonia, Persia. Her armies and those of her adversaries were perpetually traversing the Syrian and Palestinian plains and valleys. The country between the river of Egypt and the Euphrates at Carchemish was the battleground of the great powers, or these kingdoms, right? And the tract is consequently one with which Egyptian history is vitally connected. Its main features are simple and easily intelligible. A spur from Taurus detached itself in east longitude, whatever that is, and he continues on with that. Okay, briefly talks about its enemies, its adversaries, and how they attacked, or what region they came from, all this sort of stuff. Directly from west to east through the Syrian desert, there is no route that an army can traverse. Caravans may pass from Damascus by Palmyra to Circasium, and possibly may cross the desert by other lines in other directions, but such routes must be left out of sight when the tract is viewed strategically. The line of communication between Africa and Asia, between Egypt and the Mesopotamian plain, so far as armies are concerned, lies north and south by Palestine and Coelesyria to the latitude of Antioch and Aleppo. Politically, Syria, though scarcely suitable for the seat of a great power, is a country that may well hold a highly secondary rank. Well watered and well wooded, possessing numerous broad valleys and rich plains, she can nurture a population of many millions, and in her mountain fastnesses can breed races of a high physical development and excellent moral qualities. The classical idea of Syrian weakness and sensuality belongs to comparatively late times, so it's latter times, right? It's not those times when they're in league with the Egyptians. And applies especially to the inhabitants of luxurious and over-civilized cities. In the monument regions of Libanus and anti-Libanus, on the tableland of Moab and Ammon, and even in the hill tracts of Galilee, Samaria and Judea, the natives are naturally hardy, warlike, even fierce. The land itself is favourable for defence, possessing many strong positions capable of being held by a handful of brave men against almost any numbers, i.e., look at the example of the 300 Spartans. Pretty similar. Syria was thus by far the most powerful of the countries bordering upon Egypt, coming down on her, and it was natural that she should play an important part in Egyptian history. Libya was too weak for offence, too poor to tempt aggression, probably just mud hut dwellers. Ethiopia was too remote, too far away, and isolated. Syria alone was near, rich, attractive, too strong to be readily overpowered, too freedom-loving to be long held in subjection, of sufficient force to be occasionally aggressive, sure, therefore to come frequently into collision with her neighbour, and likely to maintain an equal struggle with her for centuries. Above all, she lay on the road which Egyptian effort was sure to take, and she was the link between Africa and Asia. She at once separated and united the countries which were the earliest seats of empire. So again, she was the connection, the means by which the Hindu India did trade. Others, the Phoenicians, etc., did trade. I.e., those Asian countries. the Far East, right? She at once separated and united the countries which were the earliest seats of empire. If Egypt were ambitious, if she strove to measure her strength against that of other first-rate powers, she could only reach them through Syria. If they retaliated, it was on the side of Syria that she must expect their expectations. We shall find in the sequel that from the time of the 12th sequel, maybe it's volume 2 of this. We shall find in the sequel that from the time of the 12th to that of the 26th dynasty, connection between Egypt and Syria, generally hostile, was almost perpetual, and that consequently to all who understand Egyptian history, a knowledge of Syria, both geographically and politically, is indispensable. So that's important. You've got to have that, do that research, study, and come to realise that connection between the two in that period, from the histories, etc. Climate of Egypt, Chapter 2, Climate and Productions. Climate of Egypt, of the Nile Valley, of the Eastern Highland, vegetable productions, indigenous trees and plants, anciently cultivated, indigenous wild animals, domesticated animals, birds, fish, reptiles and insects, mineral products. And there's something in Latin, provincia, so that would be province. Granorum, Legunium, Generate Fetus. Probably something like it's a province that was rich in grain, granaries, legumes, beans, all those sort of chickpeas, all that sort of stuff, from a great generated fertile soil, something like that. And that's Leo Africa 8 verse 1. In considering the climate of Egypt, we must begin by making a distinction between Egypt proper, or the valley of the Nile, including the delta and that desert and, comparatively speaking, mountainous tract which intervenes between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea, and which we have reckoned to Egypt in the preceding chapter. Well, that's the author, right? The difference between the climates of the two regions is considerable, and no description which should extend to both could be at once minute and accurate. So it's not a small thing, right? No description which should extend to both could be at once minute and accurate. Yeah, because we went there, right? The leading characteristics of the climate of the Nile Valley are combined warmth and dryness. In southern Egypt, which lies but a very little outside of the Tropic of Cancer, the heat during the summertime is excessive. Damn, you would almost, you would have tan and more, being scarcely surpassed even by that of central Bengal, which lies under the same parallel. So it was frickin' hot. The range of the thermometer throughout this portion of the year is from 100 degrees to 112 degrees in the shade during the daytime. Oh my gosh. It's like the people who went to see Elvis, did a tour at Graceland. It's so freaking hot. It's about that they just faint, right? So the old medics have to come in and revive them, take care of them, all that sort of stuff. So that's 100 to 112 degrees Fahrenheit in the daytime. At night, of course, the heat is less, but still it is very great. In northern Egypt, several causes combine to keep the summer temperature at a lower level. The difference in latitude, which is 7 degrees, by substituting oblique for vertical rays, causes a certain diminution in the solar power. The speed of the inundation of the lowlands happening at this time produces a general absorption instead of a reflection of the sun's rays, and he carries on about that. Egypt has been said to have but 2 seasons, spring and summer. Wow, me. Snow and frost are wholly unknown. So maybe you won't have a wintry season. Might be colder or something, but the temperature rarely falls below 40 degrees of Fahrenheit. Oh my gosh. The dryness of the Nile Valley is very remarkable. In ancient times it was even believed that rain scarcely ever fell in any part of it. Yeah, there you go. So no wet winters like England, etc. Miller calls Egypt a land devoid of showers. That means rain showers, not like bathrooms with showers. And Herodotus regards even a slight drizzle in the Thebaid as a prodigy. These views are exaggerated, but rest upon a basis of truth. There must be some rain there sometimes, right? There is less rain in Egypt than in almost any other known country. In the upper portion of the valley, showers ordinarily occur only on about 5 or 6 days in the year. Again, that's rain showers, not bathroom showers. So, yeah, don't think that the Egyptians were very smelly and unhygienic. While heavy rain is a rare phenomenon, not witnessed more than once in every 15 or 20 years. A continuance of heavy rain for 2 or 3 days is almost unheard of and would cause the fall of many buildings. No provision being made against it. You could have probably made it with the clay or dirt or something like that, right? The mud of the River Nile or something. So when the heavy rain came, oh, houses are melting, houses crumbling. Yeah. And Lower Egypt, the case is somewhat different. At Alexandria and other places upon the coast, rain is as common in winter as it is in the south of Europe, and so forth. In the desert tract between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea, the air is considerably drier than in the valley itself, and the alternations of heat and cold are greater. In summer, the air is suffocating. Whew, you can say freaking hot, eh? While in winter rain, okay, maybe some winter rain, right? The days are cool and the nights positively cold. So they obviously had that a winter-like season, right? And might have got some rain, and then dry for the next year or so. Heavy rain and violent thunder storms are frequent at this season. The torrent beds become full of water and pour their contents into the Nile on the one hand and the Red Sea on the other. A month or two later, these beds are perfectly dry and are covered with a drapery of green herbage, interspersed with numerous small flowers, until about May, when the heat of the sun and the oppressive wind from the desert, known as the Khamsin, so that there, Kham, should be Hamsin, right? Because in the Egyptian, you don't pronounce the K. It's the same as the Aramaic. It's not K like that. It's like Hamsin, right? Weather them up, and nothing remains except a few acacia trees and some sapless shrubs from which only a camel can derive any sustenance. Yeah, because it's probably tough, and camels can chew it, get at it. The Hamsin wind is one of the chief drawbacks upon the delights of the Egyptian climate. It arises for the most part suddenly and without warning from the south or southwest. The sky instantly becomes black and heavy, the sun loses its splendour, and it appears of a dim violet hue. A light warm breeze is felt, which gradually increases in heat till it almost equals that of an oven, and so forth. Fortunately, however, prolonged storms of the kind are rare. The duration very seldom exceeds a day, and thus, upon the whole, the Hamsin winds must be regarded rather as an annoyance and discomfort than as an actual peril to life, or a thing that ends your life, right? Puts you in danger. The vegetable productions of Egypt may be enumerated under the 6 heads of trees, shrubs, esculent plants, wild and cultivated plants, grain, artificial grasses, and plants valuable for medicinal or manufacturing purposes. The trees are few in number, comprising only the dom and date palms, the sycamore, the tamarisk, the mokhait or mixa, the sunt or acanthus, and 3 or 4 other kinds of acacias. The dom palm, Susifera thebaca, is among the most important of the vegetable products. It first appears a little north of Manfalut. It's got the latitude there, and abundant through the whole of Upper Egypt. The wood is more solid and compact than that of the ordinary date tree. It is suitable for beams and rafters, as well as for boats and other purposes which necessitate contact with water, and so forth. There's more details on that. It goes on about the fruit, the date palm, and so forth, and even vinegar. What's it got here? The leaves, branches, and indeed every part of the tree, maybe this is a palm tree or something, always constitute a main element in the food of the people. From the sap is derived an exhilarating drink. From the fruit may be made, without much difficulty, wine, brandy, and vinegar. Yeah, he's talking about the date palm. They're both cultivated and wild in that area. There's a bird. He's a child, Egyptian child. Still doesn't look like a black child, right? Or an African child. Egyptian asp. This is one that she was the hottest Egyptian. What was her name? Oh my gosh, Cleopatra. Yeah, she got that to bite her in the poison and she died. Yeah, here's the Egyptian plough. Here's their language, the hieroglyphics, an equivalent in English. Mode of ploughing, using this ox or this bull to pull this thing. And that's what it looked like. Egyptian hoe, as in, you know, a tool to dig up the garden, not the other kind of hoe. There's about Tiffany. Egyptians hoeing. Yeah. They're actually preparing, not actually hoeing. Egyptian man and woman from the monuments. You see drawings, right? Here's one of them binding wheat. Pretty rough pictures, I suppose. Oxen churning out corn, winnowing. Yeah. And goes on about furniture and different plants. There's another one. And acacias and so on. And how they benefit from them, how they use them and benefit from them. Okay, what's this? Okay, something about an acacia, and then it goes on about the material was hard. It's generally believed to be the shittim wood of Scripture, which was employed for the Ark of the Covenant and all the other furniture of the tabernacle. The sael is a gnarled and thorny tree, somewhat like a solitary hawthorn in its habit and manner of growth, but much larger. Its height, etc., etc. And there's all these shrubs and the products that came from them, like orange, lemon, apricot, bananas, and so forth. And castor oil tree. So they used all these plants, all these shrubs, etc., for really good reasons, right? They didn't waste anything. The biblos, or papyrus, anciently so common in Egypt, is not now found within the limits of the country. It is a tall, smooth flag or reed with a large triangular stalk, inside of which is contained the pith from which the Egyptians made their paper, to obviously write upon, right? The paper was manufactured by cutting the pith into strips, arranging them horizontally, and then placing across them another layer of strips, uniting the two layers by a paste and subjecting the whole to a heavy pressure. The upper and middle portions of the reed were employed for this purpose. The lower portion, together with the root, was esteemed a delicacy, so they ate it, and was eaten after it had been baked in a closed vessel. The papyrus needs a moist soil and was carefully cultivated in the shallow lakes and marshes, more especially those of the Sebennytic, known in the central part of the delta. There was a second coarser kind, probably the Cyperus diverse of botanists, which was employed in the construction of boats, of sails, of mats, baskets, sandals, and the like. The Nymphaeotis, which is pretty similar to our whitewater lily, and so forth. So yeah, it's quite abundant there, plentiful there, right? No wonder these Easterners, etc., came down to Egypt when they had a great famine in that region, geographical location, because they heard that, you know, the Egyptians had plenty. It was a very fertile region, and these Egyptians were kind, according to Dr. John Henry Clark. Was it Ben Johan? Yeah. And his visit to Luxor or Saqqara, and he's explaining it to this European guy, with the hieroglyphics, etc., on the different tall pillars and all that sort of stuff, and that's what he stated. And he's heaps more on these plants, etc. Artificial grasses or plants cultivated as fodder or food for cattle. In ancient Egypt, those four: clover, vetches, lupins, and a plant called gilban by the Arabs, and known to Pliny, either younger or the elder. philosopher, Greek philosopher, as a Lathyrus sativus. So it's probably related to the, ganja plant, being a sativa, or the tomato, or even DD nightshade plant. The clover is thought to have been either the trifolium, etc., etc. It's quite extensive, so you're going to jump this, look at something different. Medicinal plants, wild animals. Okay, and there's the details on there. Looks like building materials. Look at that. These guys probably built the first hothouse, right? Look at that. Brilliant. That's how they hung their vines. They grew their vines. Vines trained on posts. So that's where all your hothouses, all your vines, this sort of structures where it probably come from. They probably originate from. The essential vase and how's that word? Amphorae, by the looks of it. Rescuing cattle from inundation. They might get stuck in the river or something like that, right? They're jammed up in there. Something like that, right? They go out there and they rescue it because it's very important to them, right? Medicine administered to cattle when they look like they're a bit down, depressed, because animals do get down and depressed or a bit sick. They gave them this medicine, right? And there's plenty more here. The Egyptian hair, it's like a rabbit, right? Smaller than that of Europe, and it's longer ears. Plenty, alright. Gazelles from the monuments. Egyptian horses from the monuments. All this information here. Dogs and birds. Egyptian humped ox. That's what they look like. Okay, we're trying to jump past this. It's got reptiles. Information on reptiles. Chameleon, the locusts. Probably had a problem with locusts sometimes. Metals and minerals. Physical characteristics, the people and their neighbours. The Egyptians of Asiatic origin. Immigrants from the east. Not a colony from Ethiopia. Proof of this so far peculiar as to constitute a distinct race. Their complexion dark but not black. Their hair not woolly. So all this Hebrew Israelites saying that they were black and they had this woolly or nappy hair, according to this Rawlinson. Yeah, actually we made a mistake before. We said something about a Wilkinson being a grandfather, but actually his name's not Wilkinson, it's Rawlinson. Anyway, getting back to this, Hebrew Israelites, etc. Saying, oh yeah, according to Revelations, Jesus was black and all this, and Africans have woolly hair and nappy hair and all this sort of stuff, because I've seen it on the movie Malcolm X starring Denzel Washington. They totally believe it. It says there, in what's contained within this chapter, their complexion was dark but not black. African black, right? Their hair not woolly. Description of the features of their form, their subdivisions, original and later, their intellectual characteristics, etc., etc. There's something in German there. It is generally allowed by modern ethnologists that the ancient Egyptians, although located in Africa, were not an African people. So where did they come from? We have done a video on Sumerians, the Egyptians and the Hindu-Indian connection. And this could verify that they were originally Indians that migrated there before these Egyptians, these Nubians, or whoever took over. See, prior. Okay, you can verify that, could prove that, because we looked at the wall reliefs years ago, or a year ago or something, and we thought, hang on, there's like a boss whipping the crap out of this big Shaka Amos, what's that guy's name off Friday? That one used to come and steal their gold chains and stuff. He's now dead. That big guy, tiny lister, right? Big like that, and this guy's beating the crap out of him. He's on the ground, right? According to this war relief. And this guy was a skinny, no meat on his bones, you know. And we were walking around the street one day and went, hey, we've seen these people, because we walked past these certain people, right? And it clicked. They look exactly, they're the people from those war reliefs. Skinny, stick legs, no meat on them at all. And even their faces look very similar, right? And it's just basically confirmed it here, according to Rawlinson. Proof of this, okay, the Egyptians of Asiatic origin, immigrants from the east, not a colony from Ethiopia, or Cushites, with a K. Proof of this, so far peculiar as to constitute a distinct race. Their complexion dark but not black, their hair not woolly, and so forth. So let's have a look at that. It is generally allowed by modern ethnologists that the ancient Egyptians, although located in Africa, were not an African people. Either his research is totally true, or he's a total liar. You have to verify that. You have to prove it. Establish the facts, bring the evidence that proves itself evidence, and so forth. And make sure those people who have those sources are infallible or irrefutable, so you can't debunk it. Well, you can debunk it. You can debunk anything, right? But, you know, because it's proved itself as established facts or evidence, you can't really refute it. You can't refute it. Neither the formation of their skulls nor their physiognomy, nor their complexion, nor the quality of their hair, nor the general proportions of their frames connect them in any way with the indigenous African races. Oh my gosh! The Berbers and the Negroes. Going to have people coming out going, oh! And try and give us 20, 30 scriptures saying, oh, here's the proof that, you know, this guy was black, that guy was black, God was black, Jesus was black, all this sort of rubbish. Nor, again, is their language in the least like those of the African tribes. We're going to get people coming out going, but you're bringing it from a Eurocentric perspective. No. We're looking at a book of ancient Egypt and the histories from the translations by this guy, Rawlinson, a supposed expert. Again, we stress either he's revealing it's 100% true from those sources, or he's a complete liar. And again, you have to prove that he is, right? Bring the evidence that he is actually lying. Oh, because he's a European or he's a white man or whatever, you know? That's just an excuse. Yeah? You can use that, play that race card, do whatever. But, you know, if you're going to say something, bring the evidence, the facts, the established facts that this guy was racist, lying through his teeth, etc., etc. That's all we're asking. The skull and facial outline, both of the ancient Egyptian and of the modern Copt, that's the probably the Ethiopian, something like that, Coptics. His existing representative are Caucasian and Egyptian language, while of a peculiar type, has analogies which connect it both with the Semitic land, that's the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews, etc., right? But Semite means, you cut it in half, right? Semite, half. Hybrids, half-breeds, because these people were Arabs in the sense that they wandered the desert regions. They were cattlers, herdlers, they were raisers of stock, okay? Cattle, sheep, goats, whatever. They lived in tents and they wandered those desert regions. And not in the sense, oh, they were Islamic, Muslim, Mohammedans, you know, all that sort of stuff. That's not it, if you're going to define it properly. Yeah, they were nomads, they were wandering around. Even those Mohammedans, etc., were probably, you know, those kind of peoples we're referring to might have merged with them and become Semite or Semitic, you know, Semites. They became this one massive tribe or 12 tribes or whatever, but they were of the one, right? So they were Semitic. Yeah? They were half-breeds, hybrids, descendants. Yeah? Because in your Bible, it actually says, okay, you have all these Israelites, meaning in the desert, but they also had Egyptians with them. Yeah? Or non-Jews, Gentiles. So it was commanded to Moses and to the people, well, you can't have these people in your circle if they don't go through this covenant, this rite of circumcision, so they can be grafted into that circle, exclusive circle. That's a sign of covenant between, promise between God and man, okay, and those Israelites. So they had to do the same, or else they couldn't be part of it. So if they didn't, well, off you go. You're not part of our group, our tribe. So toodaloo. Yeah. So it was a command. It was like an order by God through Moses that had to be done. So he went and did it to all his children, grandchildren, whatever, and then these people, these foreigners, right? If they wanted to remain in that circle, become part of that tribe, the house of Israel. So the Egyptian language, while of a peculiar type, has analogies which connect it both with the Semitic and with the Indo-European forms of speech. It's talking about the Indian, the Hindu, okay, and probably the Aryan. I'm not talking about a white supremacist Hitler saluting race, right? Who make out that they're all that. Yeah, it's those of Europe. Let's say Caucasians, because Caucasians were a mixture of people originally, weren't they? They were like Indian, whoever wandered in there, right? Could be white, could be Asian, yeah. Nor those who were dwelling in that geographical location or Europe many millennia ago. Immigrants into their own territory, which they entered from the east and nearly allied to several important races of southwestern Asia, as the Canaanites, the Akkadians or primitive Babylonians, and the southern or Himyaritic Arabs. I don't think that's the Himalayas, but it could be that region, these Himyaritic nomads. It has been maintained by some that the immigration was from the south, the Egyptians having been a colony from Ethiopia which gradually descended the Nile and established itself in the middle and lower portions of the valley. And this theory can plead in its favour both a positive statement of Diodorus, he must be an ancient historian or something, don't know if he's Greek or whatever, and the fact, which is quite certain, of an ethnic connection between the Egyptians and some of the tribes who now occupy Abyssinia, the ancient Ethiopia. But modern research has shown quite unmistakably that the movement of the Egyptians was in the opposite direction. The study of the monuments, says the latest historian of Egypt at that particular time of this being written, right, and published, before it's published, furnishes incontrovertible evidence that the historical series of Egyptian temples, excuse us, Kermit the Frog is trying to get in our throat here and irritate us. Just have a bit of cup of tea there. Okay, so the historical series of Egyptian temples, tombs and cities constructed on either bank of the Nile follow one upon the other in chronological order in such sort that the monuments of the greatest antiquity, the pyramids, for instance, are situated furthest to the north, while the nearer one approaches the Ethiopian cataracts, the more do the monuments lose the stamp of antiquity, and the more plainly do they show the decline of art, of beauty, and of good taste. Moreover, in Ethiopia itself, the existing remains present us with the style of art that is absolutely devoid of originality. At the first glance, one can easily see that it represents Egyptian art in its degeneracy, and that art ill understood and ill executed. The utmost height to which Ethiopian civilization ever reached was a mere rude imitation, alike in scientific and in art, of Egyptian models. We must look then rather to Syria or Arabia than to Ethiopia. See, you've got to realise these weren't the names of the countries originally, right? They weren't called Syria. They had a different name according to that geographical location, that language that these people spoke, etc. Okay, they had a very different name. This ear on the end here is a N suffix, or if we're wrong, a prefix. Yeah, N suffix. We're pretty sure that's what it is. Okay, and Ethiopia, because these Greeks that went there, right, and then they went back home, they were asked by their peoples, "Oh, where'd you go?" We went across lands to, we maybe invaded this area, geographical location, and there was a whole lot of these people there, and they spoke this funny language. Okay, And we asked them, where did you get language from? Where did it originate from? And they said, one of our forefathers was called Aram. Oh, okay. Okay. So these Greeks says, well, okay, so you're the possessors of it, you're the ones who own it, are talking it, whatever. So we'll call it Aramaic. Because, yeah, you're the possessors of it, they're the ones who are speaking it, and it came from your forefathers. So, yeah, you're the possessors, you're the owners. Okay, so then they're living in this geographical location, so they're saying, well, you're the people that are occupying this land, whether you're the original indigenous or someone that's walked in there, wandered in there over the ages, right? So we all call you Syria, okay? Because you speak this Syrian language or whatever. So we put this ear on the end of it because you own it. We're the ones who possess it, as you do the land. You own the land, you possess the land as you do the language. Okay? So that's where it's coming from. It's a Greek Latin loanword. Okay? So originally, Ethiopia was not called that, right? In the African language, would have had something completely different. So these are all names in the Greek. And the end, ik, is a Greek Latin loanword. At the same time, we must admit that they were not mere Syrians or Arabs, but had from the remotest time whereto we can go back to, distinct characteristics whereby they have a good claim to be considered a separate race. What was the origin of these special characteristics cannot indeed be determined until the nature of differences of race is better understood than it is at present. Yeah, 'cause there's so many, like we've come across so many books and we've put up so many videos where, like the last one, these people of Ur of Chaldea, Mesopotamia, Syria, were actually the location is wrong, and they're actually in Ireland. The Egyptians were actually Indians that occupied it before the Nubians, etc., or whoever took over, invaded and conquered them and took over. And these people are these people when they're actually not, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay. So we must look to Syria or Arabia, then to Ethiopia as the cradle of the Egyptian nation. Some of the Egyptian characteristics may be ascribed to these influences. Some may, on the other hand, be confidently attributed to intermixture with African races. So Syrians, Africans met, intermingled, merged, intermarried, had sons and daughters to these Africans, whatever tribe they were in that era, right? So they had these hybrids, these half-breeds. Okay, so they had... it may be confidently attributed to intermixture with African races from which they were far from holding altogether aloof. Their complexion was probably rendered darker in this way. Their lips were coarsened, and the character of the eye was perhaps modified. So if you have a look at those Egyptian statues, the sculptures, etc., like that, you might see a Biggie Smalls looking guy, or a, what's the other guy's name? Trying to get the Exodus back. Oh my gosh, people back to Egypt. Oh, I've forgotten his damn name. Very, very famous. Those sort of people, right? Marcus Garvey, that's the one. You know, they look like that. And they might have Chinese looking eyes. Or they might be looking like Obama. President Obama, right? There's a couple of statues on YouTube that say, hey, look, he looks like Obama. Oh, look at this one, looks like Michael Jackson, right? They may have similar features, or totally different. They may look like, as on the wall reliefs, like Hindu Indians, or Assyrians, etc., right? It's because they're interbred and had these descendants that were half-half. A bit like Abraham and Sarai. She couldn't have a baby at the time, so he got with her maidservant, his concubine or whatever she was, Hagar, who was an Egyptian, not a Arab or a wherever they came from. originally, not a Muslim or anything like that. And she produced or brought forth a half-breed. So Ishmael was half Chaldean and half Egyptian, according to the scriptures. The Egyptians appear to have been among the darkest races with which the Greeks of the early times came into direct contact. So they would have probably came across some that were really dark, right, and light skin. This is probably after these Nubians or whoever they were had risen up. They were slaves or whatever, being beaten by these skinnier, lighter brown types, right? And then invaded and took over and probably ousted them out. Okay, so they being from Africa were darker. Or it could be to do with the sun, it could be anything like that. Yeah, go do your research on it. The Egyptians appear to have been among the darkest races with which the Greeks of the early times came into direct contact. Herodotus calls them blacks. But this is an extreme exaggeration akin to that by which all the native inhabitants of Hindustan have been termed, and he has the N-word there. Okay, so this is where that term probably came from. The Greeks, okay, called them blacks. Okay. But this is an extreme exaggeration akin to that by which all the native inhabitants, or very similar, of Hindustan, which is Indian, okay, Hindu India, have been termed the N-word. The monuments show that the real complexion of the ordinary Egyptian man was, brown with a tinge of red, a hue not very different from that of the Copt as at the present day, or the Coptic, right, person, maybe an Ethiopian, some sort of Ethiopian. The women were lighter, no doubt, because they were less exposed to the sun. Yeah, they put all that makeup on, they're inside, all that sort of stuff, doing things and staying pretty. The monuments depict them as yellow, but there can scarcely have been as much difference between the men's colour and the women's as existing paintings represent. They may be hinting to you we were a mixture. Some of the women were Asian looking, or actually Asian. Some of them were dark, some of them were light brown, some of them were darker hue, some of them were black. It could be like that. Yeah. Or maybe they thought, well, you know, every painting that we got here is very, very black, very, very dark, you know, getting kind of boring. So it'll make a lighter brown. Oh yeah, cool. Looks cool. Something different. And then brown gets out of trend. Geez, bored with that. So let's paint it yellow. You know, whatever is available. The hair was usually black and straight. What? It wasn't woolly? Oh my gosh, it wasn't like a poodle? Oh my gosh. The hair was usually black and straight. In no case was it woolly. In no case was it woolly. Hebrew Israelites, etc. Though sometimes it grew in short, crisp curls. It probably played with it, you know, with a board, whatever. Yeah, sometimes it grew in short, crisp curls. Notice the word sometimes. Men commonly shaved both the hair and the beard. Yeah, because in the hot desert, yeah, hair might get some bugs, right? Hell of a lot cooler, hell of a lot cleaner. So they're probably very into their hygiene, right? They shaved both the hair and the beard and went about with their heads perfectly bare, or bald, Kojak, or else wore wigs or a close-fitting cap. Women always wore their own hair and plaited it in long tresses, sometimes reaching to the waist. The hair of the wigs, as also that which is found sometimes growing on the heads of the mummies, is coarse to the eye of a European, but has no resemblance to that of the Negro. Hebrew Israelites, yeah, saying, oh yeah, it's Jesus' hair is white and woolly and like a poodle, you know, natty and all this sort of stuff. What do you call that? Nappy, yeah, which is actually a derogative term. Kinky and all this sort of stuff, right? Completely wrong. Yeah? If this guy is telling the truth, and it's coming from the original ancient records, yeah, from the facts left behind, the writings etc. left behind, the facts. So it has no resemblance to that of the Negro. We're not being fascist or racist or anything like that. We're just bringing you the truth. That's what we're about, the ministry of the real truth. Bringing you the real truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You can say what you want about us, but that's the truth of it. Okay? Because we are light-skinned brown, so why would we want to be racist? That's just totally silly, isn't it? The Egyptians, figure 11, whoever that is, probably further back, had features not altogether unlike those of their neighbours, the Syrians, but with distinguishing peculiarities, just slight differences there, right? The forehead was straight but somewhat low. The nose generally long and straight, but sometimes slightly aquiline. So I'm just about to say Wilkinson. What this Rawlinson is doing probably is looking at the wall reliefs, okay, all the records, etc., etc. Okay, how they depicted, how they painted their people in their age. He's not going, oh yeah, here's a kid's book, and this is what they might have looked like. And like the ark is a watermelon shape or sushi shape, or this sort of crap, and it's got giraffes and elephants hanging out of it. No, he's looking at the actual art, the literature, the records, etc., right? To bring the evidence of what it was really like. The forehead was straight, but somewhat low. The nose generally long and straight, but sometimes slightly aquiline. It wasn't a big hooked nose, right? Yeah, but who says that there wasn't a person there with a big hooked nose? The lips were over full. Yeah, big, African people lips. Or other. But the upper lip was short. So it had like a little top lip and a big bottom lip. And the mouth was seldom too wide. The chin was good, being well rounded and neither retreating nor projecting too far. The most marked and peculiar feature was the eye, which was a long narrow slit, like that of the Chinese. Look at the wall reliefs. Statues, but placed horizontally and not obliquely. So it was slanted, but it wasn't like up or down, right? As you have different shades of Asians, right? Japanese, Chinese, etc. An eyebrow also long and thin, but very distinctly penciled, shaded it. So they shaved off their eyebrows, and that's where all you Maori and Pacific Islanders who try to look pretty in your older days, you got the shaved eyebrows, and you got that black pencil on it, which looks kind of funny, but you just like doing that. Depends on who's wearing it, right? An eyebrow, also long and thin, but very distinctly penciled, shaded it. The colouring was always dark. The hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, and beard, if any, being black or nearly so, and the eyes black or dark brown. That's the way they painted it, right? In form, the Egyptian resembled the modern Arab. Ooh. He was tall, his limbs were long and supple, his head was well placed upon his shoulders, his movements were graceful, his carriage dignified, the way he carried himself. In general, however, his frame was too spare, and his hands and feet were unduly large. The women were as thin as the men, and had, there you go, the women were as thin as the men. So, is he talking about a prior peoples before the big, bulky, Shaka most looking Arnold Schwarzenegger type bulky Egyptians, like what's the name, Michael Jordan, who was a gong banger on announcer on Michael Jackson's Remember the Time, and the other guy that was the actual guard, tiny Lister, right, that size, In form, the Egyptian resembled the modern Arab. He was tall, his limbs were long and supple, his head was well placed upon his shoulders, his movements were graceful, his carriage dignified, the way he held himself. In general, however, his frame was too spare, and his hands and feet were unduly large. Okay, that's some of them, right? The women were as thin as the men and had forms nearly similar. Well, they had to be big and bulky. Warriors, man. Children, alpha male sort of thing. Children, figure 15. However, appear to have been sufficiently plump. Little short fatties, but they are not often represented or depicted on these wall paintings, reliefs, etc. The most ancient document which has come down to us bearing on the history of Egypt represents the Egyptian people as divided into a number of distinct races. We read of Ludim, Anamim, Libahim, Naftuim, Pathrusim, Kalusim, and Kaptorim. Look at that, it's got im on the end of it. That's Hebrew. As distinct sons of Mizraim. For example, as separate tribes of the powerful people which inhabited the two Egypts. These are the descendants of Noah's sons, probably their descendants, who became the people who occupied the land of Put, Mizraim, later Egypt, and what's the other one? Canaan. It is suggested that the Ludim were the dominant race, or Egyptians proper, prior to them, right? Or maybe saying here the real Egyptians, who were called in Egypt Lut or Rut, example, men par excellence. That the Anamim were the Anu of the monuments who were dispersed widely over the Nile Valley and gave name to On, Heliopolis, and other cities. That the Naphtuhim, Hatar, were the domain of Hatar, or people of Memphis. Pathruism, Praetorius, the people of the south, or inhabitants of the Thebaid. Etc. But these identifications are all of them more or less uncertain, and it would seem that whatever tribal differences may have existed at the first, they had disappeared, or all but disappeared, by the time that the history of Egypt becomes known to us. Okay, so we've only got this history of what these Pan-Africans, these Egyptian followers, whatever, these Egyptologists are telling us. Okay, they're not telling us what went on millenniums before we got that history. Okay, say we only go back 5,000 years in the history, right? Chronological timetable, whatever, right? Through history, right? We might, some might suggest, well, we can go back further, okay? But try going back 50 million years or 10,000 years, 20,000 years further, right? You may not have the history for that. Okay? So if you find little bits of fragments and all that sort of stuff, you experts, theologists, scholars, whatever, it's just small bits of fragment, right? You haven't got the complete picture. So you can sit there and go, oh, well, we think, we believe, we've got an idea. You're not saying that you know. Okay? You're assuming, aren't you? From those little pieces of fragment that you've got. But these identifications are, all of them, more or less uncertain, and it would seem that whatever tribal differences may have existed, at the first they had disappeared, all but disappeared by the time that the history of Egypt becomes known to us today, right? From this guy's days to us. The only real distinction that remained was one between the people of the South Country and those of the North, who had their respective peculiarities and even spoke dialects that were somewhat different from the Egyptian. Okay? Otherwise, the various Egyptian tribes had been fused together and moulded into one compact and homogeneous people. So the whole mixture of different peoples, probably Phoenicians, Arameans, Assyrians, Israelites, Hittites, whoever, right? That came in there, or the slaves or whatever. Otherwise, the various Egyptian tribes had been fused together and moulded into one compact and homogeneous people before the time when history first takes cognizance of them, before we even had any idea. Right? This is centuries and centuries. Centuries after centuries later. Intellectually, the Egyptians must take rank among the foremost nations of remote antiquity, but cannot compare with the great European races whose rise was later, the Greeks and Romans. Their minds possessed much subtlety and acuteness. They were fond of composition, making songs, singing songs, instruments, and all that sort of stuff, playing the guitar and all that sort of stuff, and made considerable advances in many of the sciences. They were intelligent, ingenious, speculative. It is astonishing what an extensive literature they possessed at a very early date. Books on religion, on morals, laws, rhetoric, arithmetic, mensuration, or the menses, geometry, medicine, books of travels, and above all, novels. But the merit of the works is slight. You only got a little bit of that, right? There's probably much more that we don't know about, right? We haven't got. The novels are vapid, the medical treatises interlarded with charms and exorcisms, the travels devoid of interest, the general style of all the books forced and stilted. Egypt may in some particulars have stimulated Greek thought, directing it into new lines and giving it a basis to work upon. But otherwise, it cannot be said that the world owes much of its intellectual progress to this people. Yeah. So all this plagiarism, claims, all this sort of stuff. Yeah, maybe true in part, but you can't blame it all to say, oh, yeah, everyone took everything from us alone. Yeah, we were the chosen ones, and everyone took everything from us. Yeah, we were the ones, right? You can't really say that. Egypt may in some particulars have stimulated Greek thought, directing it into new lines and giving it a basis to work upon. It's a foundation to work upon. But otherwise it cannot be said that the world owes much of its intellectual progress to this people. The advancements through time, about whose literary productions there's always something that is weak and childish, maybe mythical, etc. In art, the power which the Egyptians exhibited was doubtless greater. Yeah, brilliant. We'll give that a tick. The architecture was on the grander scale, another tick, and dwarfs the Greek in comparison. Yeah, the Greeks couldn't match it. Did they build pyramids? Did they do this? Did they do that? Did they have the mummifications, all that sort of stuff? No. But even here it is to be noted that the higher qualities of art were wanting. Probably slight improvement or something like that, compared to these medieval arts, the Greek art and all that sort of stuff, right? There is no beauty of proportion. On the contrary, the gigantic columns are clumsy from their undue massiveness and are far too thickly crowded together. They are rather rounded piers in pillars, and the capitals are coarse and heavy. The coloured ornamentation used was over glaring. The forms of the ornamentation was almost always stiff and sometimes absolutely hideous. In mimetic art, the Egyptians might perhaps have done better had they been at liberty to allow their natural powers free scope. But they worked in shackles. A dull, dead conventionalism bore sway over the land. Okay. Yeah, probably the Greeks took their ideas and made them better, right? As people do, right? Like the Americans, they take from the Chinese, the Asians, their computers, right? Some of them from their lot in the garage. Started off these computers, Steve Jobs and the other guy, whatever, and then the Asians basically over the century have improved on it. Yeah, they made it better. Yeah, etc. etc. Like there's those sex robots that are out, the AI robots, all that sort of stuff. America may make it really great, make the great ones, but these Chinese, who are very creative, etc., very technical, may make it even better. It doesn't really look like it at the moment, but it's just an example, possibility. Okay, so they worked in shackles. A dull, dead conventionalism bore sway over the land, and though some exceptions occur, Egyptians' mimetic art is in the main a reproduction of the same unvarying forms without freedom of design or vigour of treatment. And don't forget, that's according to this guy, this Egyptologist Rawlinson, not us. Keep that in mind. In morals, the Egyptians combined an extraordinary degree of theoretic perfection with an exceedingly lax and imperfect practice. It has been said that the 42 laws of the Egyptian religion, Ma'at, contained in the 125th chapter of the Book of the Dead, fall short in nothing of the teaching of Christianity, and conjectured that Moses, in compiling his code of laws, did but translate into Hebrew the religious precepts which he found in the sacred books of the people among whom he had been brought up. Okay. Yeah, he was brought up in the Egyptian courts by the Egyptians, so he knew their culture, their religion, their language, how to write, all this sort of stuff, right, as a young lad. Then he breaks away, and all of that's in the back of his mind, his subconscious, right? So he frees his people, and they go out into the desert, and he says, right, you've got to have some rules. God said that here's some rules, right? But God gives them more or less condensed rules, right? 10 commandments, okay? Plus those 613 Levitical laws of the priesthood, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay. Whereas what we found through our research is that they were very similar to the king of Shurapak's laws, or Shurapak, the city of Shurapak, right, which was in Syria. Okay, and perhaps the Hammurabi laws, which probably may have come after that. We have to go do our research on it. For his people, may have been influenced by those, either. But they're very, very similar. The 10 Commandments, the 613 Levitical laws, with the laws of Shurappak, the king of Syria once upon a time. Okay, the laws that he decreed, and they all wrote down. And you've got to remember that Moses didn't write down all those things. He probably got someone else to do it for him. He could have been illiterate. Might not have been. Right? But apparently, even the Jews, today's Jews will admit, no, he didn't write those. Okay, we'll admit it. But we attribute to them, like Christians say, oh, the 5 books of the law or instruction or Torah were attributed to Moses, right? He didn't actually write them down. So these Jews basically have admitted, apparently, yeah, that's right. But because it's our custom, our tradition, we have to put a name to the scrolls. We attributed them to Moses. Could have been his brother Aaron, could have wrote it down. Could have been someone later on, right? That was well versed in those scriptures, commandments, and Levitical laws. Okay, that's why these Jews, these Israelites, these Pharisees, rather, in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the temples and that, had the Mosaic law. Obviously, somebody wrote it down, and then they passed it on. Okay? It might have been a guy that was selected as the writer of it. Write it all down. As I say it, as I bellow it, says Moses, write it down. Right? Okay, God just said, do this. You got to wear tassels on the end of your shoes or your sandals or something. Yeah, write that down. Yeah. Okay. Now it's telling me you can't look at me when I climb up the ladder because I'm not wearing any loincloth underneath or something like that. That's just what we come across as well. Yeah, don't do that. Right? Yeah. You have to get your skin cut, right, and then we'll party, right? Well, that sort of stuff. Okay. Well, that sort of thing. Okay. So we're going to leave that there because we really need to go to the bathroom and maybe have something to eat. But we hope that you really enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a like. And we hope immensely that it's opened your eyes to the truth in regards to the ancient Egyptian or Hamite civilization, the customs, the agriculture, etc., that we've covered. If you like it, give us a like, and then subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to do that; it's very important. Tell us how much you enjoyed it, and give us your feedback, and then go share this with all your family, friends, and others, whether they be Christian, Judaic, Muslim, or Hebrew Israelite, or whoever, right? To make them wake up and realise, hey man, somebody's giving you all this information which is incorrect. Okay? They're getting it all from obviously a European source, like this Reggie guy said on Sarneta TV, the live debate. They should really get it from the ancients. If they left something behind, and you can translate it into nearest English, etc., well then get that, but provide your sources, your links as backup, as proof, right? They just go, oh, the Egyptians did this and said that, and someone asks you, well, where's the proof that they had that sort of mindset? And you can't back it up. It's just hearsay, right? It's a false claim. You got no backup. You got no source links, right? It's easy. There's a lot of people spout a lot of crap off the top of their head. They might have heard it in their church, or their friends might have told them or suggested or something like that, right? And they just become, or they might have even read it, right? Without really doing extensive research on who that source was, whether it was a scholar, theologian, expert, whatever. Okay? And they're just parrots. They're trained parrots. Yeah? To parrot it to somebody else and say, oh, did you know? And then they get upset because somebody, like, say, Jabari on Sarneta Live TV, or Reggie, or Shaka Almost, says, no, you haven't studied it enough. Where's your sources? I brought you the sources here. You have brought nothing. So your claims, unbacked, are worthless. Okay? It's just a whole lot of wasted air coming out of your mouth. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. Give us a like, subscribe, add your comments, and then we'll get back to you on those. And then go share this video with all your family, friends, and others.